Welcome to today's lesson. Today's learning target is I can use the easy common denominator method to add fractions with unlike denominators. Let's figure out how this works. All right. How to use the easy common denominator method to add unlike fractions. Step 1. Create equivalent fractions that share a common denominator. That sounds different, doesn't it? We're going to get to that in one moment. But first, step 2, add the numerators. Now that, I hope, sounds a little familiar. All right, let's get to the new stuff. What are equivalent fractions? Well, if we have to make equivalent fractions, we should understand what they are, right? Equivalent fractions use different numbers to represent the same amount. Let's take a look at some examples. Here we have the fraction 1/2. Now, equivalent fractions to 1/2 are fractions that also represent 1/2, but use different numbers. So, for example, 2/4 represents the same value or amount as 1/2, but uses different numbers. 3/6 is another equivalent fraction to 1/2. 5/10 is another example of an equivalent fraction to 1/2. And 50/100ths is another example. These fractions are equivalent because they represent the same amount, but they use different numbers to do it. How do we create equivalent fractions? We're going to multiply both the top and bottom numbers by the same number. So let's look back at the same example, 1/2. If we multiply both the top and bottom number by, let's say, 2, we will create an equivalent fraction. 1 times 2 is 2, and 2 times 2 is 4, and 2/4 is equivalent to 1/2. Let's try it again. Let's keep with 1/2. This time we'll multiply both the top and bottom numbers by 5. Okay, let's see. 1 times 5 is 5, and 2 times 5 is 10. 5/10 is equivalent to 1/2. It's equal to 1/2. Let's try it one more time. Let's see. How about 1 times 12 and 2 times 12? Well, in this case, we're going to get 1 times 12 is 12, and 2 times 12 is 24. 12/24 is another equivalent fraction to 1/2. All we have to do is multiply both the top and bottom numbers of the fraction by the same number, and we'll get an equivalent fraction. Okay, now, don't be overwhelmed by the way this looks. Okay, we are going to focus now on how to use the easy common denominator method for finding equivalent fractions. And we have here a reminder of our 2 steps. And step 1 says, create equivalent fractions that share a common denominator. We know what equivalent fractions are now. Now we just got to figure out what a common denominator is. And a common denominator is simply a denominator, in this case 10, that 2 fractions have in common. And these 2 fractions, 5/10 and 6/10, have the denominator 10 in common. That makes sense. So here's how you do it, all right? You take the denominator of your first fraction. So here's 1/2 and our denominator is 2. And you multiply that denominator, 2, by both parts, top and bottom, of the other fraction, 3/5. And then you take the denominator of your second fraction, 3/5, and you're going to multiply it by both parts of your first fraction. So they kind of trade places, and you multiply. So going back to our 1/2 fraction here, we took the 2, we wrote it down here, and we multiplied both the 3 and 5 and 3/5 by 2. And 3 times 2 is 6, and 5 times 2 is 10. And then we repeated the process. We took the 5, the denominator of our second fraction, brought it down here, and we multiplied 5 times 1, and we got 5. And we multiplied 5 times 2, and we got 10. And that helped us create equivalent fractions. So 5/10 is equivalent to 1/2, and 6/10 is equivalent to 3/5. and they share a common denominator. And why is this important? Step 2, add the numerators. Now that our denominators are the same, this is just like every other addition problem we've seen. All we do is add the numerators. So 5/10 plus 6/10 is 11/10. Let's take a look at a couple more examples. And it's okay if you feel confused, because this is confusing at first, but the more we do it, the better we're going to get. So here's an example. We have the fractions 2/3 and 1/8. All right. Let's first create some equivalent fractions. Okay. Let's start by taking this first fraction here, this 3, and let's write it down here. And let's multiply our second fraction, 1/8, by 3. All right. So I'm going to take this 3, we're going to go down here, and we're going to write 3 and multiply it by both the top and bottom numbers, 1 and 8. So 1 times 3, that's 3, and 8 times 3, that is 24. And guess what? 3/24 is equivalent to 1/8. Okay, now let's reverse the process. Let's take the 8, and let's bring it down and multiply it by both the top and bottom numbers of our first fraction, 2/3. Okay, so 8 times 2, that's 16. And 8 times 3, that's 24. And what do you know? We have common denominators. That's a denominator that both of these fractions have in common. It's 24. And 16/24 is equivalent to 2/3. And 3/24 is equivalent to 1/8. We're ready to add. Step 2, let's add our numerators. Here we go. 16/24 plus 3/24 equals 19/24. Let's try one more. All right, here we have 3/5 and 7/9. Okay, now I'm going to give you a hint, and then I'm going to get you to participate a little bit here. All right, we're going to start with this first denominator in our first fraction, 3/5. We're going to start with the 5. What do we do with the 5? What's our first step? Go ahead and try to figure that out right now. Okay, did you say we're going to take our 5 and we're going to bring it down and multiply that 5 by both the top and bottom number of our second fraction, 7/9? Yeah, you got it. So let's do that. 7 times 5 is 35, and 9 times 5 is 45. All right, now what are we going to do next? You got it. We're going to go to our second fraction, 7/9, and we're going to bring that 9 down and multiply it by both the top and bottom number of our first fraction. So 9 times 3, that's 27, and 9 times 5, that is 45. And lo and behold, we have common denominators. Denominator both fractions have in common, and 27/45 is equivalent to 3/5, and 35/45 is equivalent to 7/9. We are ready to add. What is our final answer? 27/45 plus 35/45 is equal to what? Did you say 62/45? I hope so. That's the right answer. Okay. Today's learning target is I can use the easy common denominator method to add fractions with unlike denominators. Now, if you still feel confused, if you feel like you are not ready to work by yourself, these 5 practice problems coming up might be too much, then I am here. I want to work with you today. Please say something to me. Please let me know. And we're going to work together on these. And I promise, maybe not today, but tomorrow or the next day, you are going to get this. You can get this and you will get this. Let's get to work.